What does political media bias mean to you?
Political media bias is the news stations manipulating the information they give you to sway your opinion or to gain power for themselves or their point of view.
So I think political media bias is like when the media tries to make you think a certain way, whether it's conservative or liberal, and they kind of skew the news so that you side with a certain, side.
Political media bias is when the media has a stake in like whoever's running for certain political positions, and so they kind of put their newscasts in a different light to make certain people look good.
Political media bias is political reporting done from a non-neutral point of view with the intent of swaying the viewer in a certain political direction. There are two main types of political bias, conservative and liberal. Conservative views are views that are more congruent to traditional Republican values, whereas liberal views are views that represent progressive democratic ideals. In this partisan world, can the media remain unbiased? Ideally, yes, but in reality, no. The major concern is that these media biases ultimately influence the political decisions of their viewers. Citizens consider the media to be experts and therefore use the news as a shortcut to make decisions, and ideally believe it to be unbiased. What news source do you think is conservatively biased?
Fox News.
Fox News is a little more conservative.
Like Fox News.
Fox is conservative.
Well, definitely Fox is very conservative.
I watch Fox News just to laugh at how biased they are.
It's no secret that the owner of Fox News, Rupert Murdoch, has a conservative political agenda. Does this personal agenda carry over to the news stations that he owns? We believe so.
I dealt with people like this for 20 years. They will get up every day, they will kill somebody and go have some chicken at KFC.
We can't even say you're articulate. We can't even give you guys compliments.
Half of the kids in this country under 5 years old are minorities. White people are having fewer. Put it bluntly, we need more babies.
If Rupert Murdoch claims that the footage you just saw isn't biased, how can we believe the rest of his corporations aren't biased as well? But it is not a one-sided issue. There's also a liberal bias. According to a UCLA study done by Tim Grossclose, the average news station is about as far from the center towards the liberal side as Fox News is towards the conservative side. What news source do you think is liberally biased?
I think ABC, our common, news king and that sort of things. They try to do a better job, but they still lean towards one way. And
CNN is a more liberal source.
CNN is supposedly the more democratic, liberal station.
MSNBC towards Democrats.
Say Comedy Central news stations. Those are. I guess they're just for joke, but they're reporting the news and it is quite biased.
While the liberal bias might not appear as blatant as what appears on Fox, the bias is still there.
So, you've been monitoring all the network coverage of this, and you say that on two of the networks, ABC and NBC, in their coverage of L.A. Sister, they haven't mentioned even that he's a Democrat?
It's unbelievable. 2 days ago, on the Today Show, 14 segments on this. Not once did they mention he was a Democrat.
You're kidding.
ABC, and then NBC Nightly News 2 days ago, not once mentioned that he was a Democrat. Good Morning America, not once mentioned he was that he was a Democrat. ABC Nightly News, not once mentioned that he was a Democrat. CBS, one mention on the Nightly News, no mention on the Morning News. AP did a 3-paragraph breaking story, never mentioned he was a Democrat. Then they came out with a full story, never mentioned he was a Democrat. Last night, NBC never mentioned he was a Democrat. Last night, ABC never mentioned that he was a Democrat. It is unbelievable.
While the liberal bias might not appear as blatant as what appears on Fox, the bias is still there. Instead of being openly hostile towards the other side, liberal bias is achieved through choice of stories and the language used to present the story. So even though the liberal bias isn't in your face, it's still just as prevalent and significant. So the real question is, does all of this bias really influence voting behavior?
Is the impact of the media bias really important?
I think it is, but the challenge is to look for it in subtle ways.
I think if we look for it in its extreme version, taking a McCain supporter and turning that person into an Obama supporter, we're not going to find the evidence for it. But we can find it in subtle ways, such as what issues people think are important. That's related to what issues are being covered in the news. In those sorts of ways we can see effects of the media, and I think they are important.
So Bethany, could you tell us if you believe the media influences voting decisions, and if so, how?
I think it can influence voting decisions. I think it can tell us what issues are important. People tend to take their cues on what issues matter from the media, although we don't need the media right now to tell us that there's problems with gas prices and that there's a housing crisis. It's still, the media can shed light on an issue.
Some people believe even if political media bias does translate into different voting behaviors, the results would be minimal. However, according to a study by Esther Duflo, cities in which Fox News was introduced to got 200,000 more Republican voters in the 2000 presidential election than from the 1996 election. Those 200,000 votes were enough to win George Bush the presidency. As we have already established, it is impossible for media to remain balanced in the current political climate. It would be unreasonable to expect the media to self-regulate biases and identify the points of view of every journalist that writes a story. Instead, it is on the viewers to look into their sources and identify what potential biases they may hold if the viewers want to make an informed decision.
So, for the next election, don't just follow the crowd. Read up on the candidates and look at different sources. Find out about who to vote for, and then make a good decision that you can live with. The future is in your hands.